For those of you who will be watching me on video, just a little self-introduction. My name is Margaret Kim. 我的中文名字叫金守明. I'm teaching the Shakespeare class. Today we're going to talk about Hamlet. As to why I'm teaching Shakespeare, why I'm qualified, I have a PhD in English from Harvard. I was trained actually to study the literature of the Middle Ages. I'm a medievalist technically, so I really specialize in literature the year 1400 and before. However, as all medievalists know, if you're trained as an English medievalist, you would know Shakespeare because medievalists are supposed to know about the Middle Ages and also what comes after. Because what comes after, such as Shakespeare in the 16th century, was greatly influenced by what happened with the development of the language, of the English language, and the development of medieval civilization that just comes before. So Shakespeare is a must for medievalists, and so that's why I'm teaching it. The time I actually was going to school at Harvard, I actually also happened to be going to school at a time when the greatest scholars of Shakespeare taught at Harvard. In my opinion, the greatest scholars of Shakespeare. They're world famous. Stephen Greenblatt is not just a great Shakespearean, but also a man of letters that is famous in the West. And Marjorie Garber, somebody who also taught Shakespeare at Harvard, also a renowned scholar. And the reason I mention them both is that it's a common thing about Shakespeare. We often assume that an author is great because of what they did and what they wrote, such as Shakespeare. But also an author is great too, precisely because there are great scholars to study them. In the field of Shakespeare studies and Renaissance English studies, it just so happens that it's a field that has attracted the greatest talents in the scholarly world. So when you're a field that has attracted the greatest talent, then it becomes an important field. And so justly, Shakespeare deserves these great critics, great scholars that have done great scholarships and done great research and made great contributions to the way we think and we talk about Shakespeare. Stephen Greenblatt and Marge Garber, I do urge you to read their works. They're amazing, amazing scholarly works that actually are very relevant to us, and when you read them, you see the appeal not just to people who are intellectuals, but also people who are just interested in your society, your world, and how Shakespeare is relevant to us today. And so for that, I would credit myself for having read them when I was younger and sort of being inspired by them and feeling that their point is well made, that we need to understand the relevance of Shakespeare in our world today, and why is it so important when we investigate Shakespeare's plays, Shakespeare's poetry, we could understand how we see the world and compare how Shakespeare understood the world. So today we're dealing with Hamlet, justly, the most famous play by Shakespeare. Also, the longest play by Shakespeare. Okay. And it was written at a time just around the turn of the century, so 1600. The reason that year is important is that if you take the year 1600, the beginning of the 17th century, you subtract 1600 by 12, and then you also add 1600 by 12. That's 24 years. So during those 24 years, from the year around 1580 something or so to the year 1612 or so. That's the most productive, creative, and brilliant period of Shakespeare's career as a playwright. Okay. We all think of authors or great composers of music or writers like Shakespeare as geniuses, but people are not geniuses all the time. You know, they have to learn how to write and then they become better. So when Shakespeare was younger, he wrote good plays and he learned, and increasingly he got better. So this is the period we're talking about, the 24 years, you know, from about 1580s to 1612, certainly the 24 years. Shakespeare wrote the greatest plays in tragedy, comedy, history, as well as some problem plays we've talked about. Okay. And these four, if you've noticed, they're all written starting with Hamlet from the beginning of the 17th century. And in that decade, he wrote the four greatest tragedies of his career, of his corpus: Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. So these four are justly known as the four great tragedies. There are other great tragedies he wrote, such as the one that we talked about last week, or the week before last week, Julius Caesar, also a tragedy. And also written around this period, actually a year or so before Hamlet was written, Julius Caesar, also a tragedy. So, but these four are known as the four great ones. If you've noticed too, 3 out of 4 of these tragedies deal with politics. Okay. Yeah, I mean, a lot of my students do tell me I don't like politics, I don't want to talk about politics. But in Shakespeare's world, everything was political. And so you have to understand politics to a certain extent. The reason I call that to your attention today is that Shakespeare is not only interested in politics, he understands politics as a game. It's a game you play. But in different cultures, different societies, the game is played differently because the rules are different. So for instance, the game of politics in Julius Caesar is different than the game of politics in Hamlet, because in Hamlet, the game of politics is a Christian one. Hamlet is a Christian. The Danes are Christian in this play. So why is that? How does that mark a difference with Roman politics in Julius Caesar? In Roman politics, you could commit suicide. Romans thought suicide was an honorable thing, an honorable way to end your life. Okay. For Christians, your life is given by God. Your life is sacred, so you cannot take your own life. And there are rules about taking away life that govern how Christians understand the world. So first, you cannot commit suicide as a Christian. If you commit suicide, you're certain to go to hell. Okay. Then there are other things too, you know, about can you kill somebody else? Obviously, that is murder. But then what? What would God think? All these things. So the rules are different. So Shakespeare is interested in how, when you're dealing with different cultures and different societies, you're dealing with different games of politics. Shaped differently, structured differently. The same way in Taiwan, you know, we could think about that too. In Taiwan, filial piety, 孝道, 孝顺, is very important. So that may play a factor in politics. If somebody is accused of being unfilial to their parents, then that is a horrible thing to say, right, in public. So there are all these rules about politics, and Shakespeare is interested. Let me get right back to Hamlet specifically. Hamlet is the longest play of Shakespeare, and being the longest play, it's hard to imagine how it was put on the stage, because when you have the entire text and you stage it, it takes at least 4 hours. And for us today to go back and try to imagine what it must have been like at that time for people to be going to the play and spending 4+ hours, because as you know nowadays, human beings have short attention spans, so they can't focus. Focusing is a problem. So for modern humans nowadays, it's difficult to understand how Shakespeare managed to produce the play in the first place. And yet, knowing how long it is, being the longest play, takes a long time to act out the entire play from beginning to end. It's almost never really actually entirely acted out. But knowing how long, we know that from the very beginning that this play was put on the stage. It was a huge blockbuster box office bestseller, most popular play. It was so popular that when it was dramatized on the stage, there were immediate attempts, bad, inadequate, but attempts to write down what was said on the stage, because the speeches were so captivating. They appealed to the audience. They were like, oh my God, that is such a moving speech. You know, the famous to be or not to be speech. So famous, and we're going to get to the actual to be or not to be speech later, but because it was not, the play was put on stage first, and then the play was published as a text later. So as I said, very early there were pirated texts, meaning people without permission, without Shakespeare's permission. They were just trying to write down what they remember, because it was just a captivating play. So one of the actors who was in the first production, and he certainly did not play Hamlet, but he was on stage, and he claimed that he was on stage when, you know, when important speeches were being recited. So he claimed, well, I know the to be or not to be speech, but this guy just had printed a to be or not to be speech that was quite garbled, meaning inaccurate. And also when you read it, it's comical because it's not tragic at all. But because Hamlet was such a huge bestseller, everybody wanted something about Hamlet. So this is the garbled, not the accurate one. Garbled to be speech. To be or not to be? There's the point. To die, to sleep, is that all? All. No, to sleep, to dream, marry, there it goes. For in that dream of death, when we awake, and born before an everlasting judge, from whence no passenger ever returned, the undiscovered country at whose sight the happy smiles and the accused damned. It sounds totally, it has, to me, it has a comical kind of tone to it, that it's not supposed to be there for Hamlet's to be or not to be speech. I. Sounds like a sailor, like a sea captain. But it does try to capture what is it about. It's about Hamlet's personal condition. That's why this guy who misremembered a lot of the speech kept repeating the word I. Okay. So it was popular, so what we know, it's a popular thing. As I say here, it's a challenge to stage and challenge for actors, because it's got these long lines and you have to remember them very well. And also, one thing, even though it was a best selling thriller, one thing, the acting is difficult. How do you act melancholy, gloomy? You know, sometimes if you're not a good actor, it's simply very difficult to act. So as I said, there are lots of pirated editions. Okay, and there's always demand for the staging of Hamlet. And if you're in show business today, if you're an actor, you get to play Hamlet, that means you are big deal. In the movies, you'll see attempt after attempt, people trying to make movies based on Hamlet, and almost always they're not very good. There are some good ones, but most of them I do watch them because I feel like it's my duty as a teacher of Shakespeare to see what movie versions of Hamlet there are, but I tend to be impatient about most of them because they're all not very good. Okay. But as I just said, to be the actor that plays Hamlet, that means you are a big deal. And one reason too is that, as I just said too, it's a challenge to be Hamlet, to act Hamlet's part. So, in fact, not a lot of good actors on that. There are some actors, I would say, are very good in the Hamlet role. Unfortunately, even some of the biggest stars don't do the Hamlet part very well. And also, unfortunately, because Hamlet has been popular since the very first moment it was put on the stage, there are lots of copycats. People try to copy the story and try to make entertainment out of the Hamlet story. In my opinion, unfortunate. Why? Because they all show, when they do that their imagination of the story is not so good. It's Shakespeare who imagines the Hamlet story well. Obviously, he's the original. He imagines the Hamlet story. But later, when later writers, artists, try to reimagine the Hamlet story in their own way and adapt it to this stage for popular entertainment, I would say not so good. One, I know my child, when she was 5 years old, she loved it. She wanted to go see The Lion King. It is based on the Hamlet story. I don't think very highly of it, but my kid loved it. She's 5, yeah. 中文常常讲王子复仇记. Okay. So in popular culture, the imagination of Hamlet's story is The Lion King one. Why is it not so good? Well, first, it's a simple-minded understanding of Hamlet. You know, prince is good, prince's father gets killed, prince gets revenge. Yeah, it is simple-minded. And also The Lion King, you know, has a happy ending. So to a certain extent, it doesn't get what Shakespeare is trying to say about Hamlet, that it has a tragic ending. There are also other movies, and these are lesser-known movies. That's why I introduced them. This one is about Hamlet being somebody who's from a family that makes beer. And so instead of imagining Hamlet as a political story about a prince, modern people imagine Hamlet as, you know, like maybe corporate prince. You know, you're from a wealthy family, your family makes beer, or you're from a wealthy family, your family runs a factory, and you have to take over the family business. Okay, so Strange Brew, and there's another one called Hamlet Goes Business. It's a movie from Finland, if I remember correctly, Hamlet Goes Business. Yeah, so again, notice the modern people's transposition of the political story, the politics, into commerce, right? Hamlet is now not the prince, but the rich kid, the rich heir of a wealthy, powerful commercial family, corporate family. So the reason I put this down is this is what I do not want you to do when you write about Hamlet. But you will see people write it down like magazines, newspapers, all the time. Yeah. 哈姆雷特完成报仇大业，离开人世的I don't know how to read the Chinese. 一煞是不是？是世界文学史上最悲观的一幕。莎士比亚通过哈姆雷特一句表达和概括了人类情感的多个主题：生与死、爱与恨、善良与丑恶，以及人生方面面的变幻无常等等。正因为如此，哈姆雷特成了一部旷世不衰、令人深思文学著作。If you write that on a test, I will give you a C, and that's a polite C, like I cannot fail you because you wrote something. It says nothing. Life and death, love and hate. It's like it doesn't say anything. And also, 完成抱负大业. That's another thing too. I'm not sure that Shakespeare wants you to have an understanding that it's purely about revenge, or it is about revenge, but Shakespeare wants you to have a critical understanding of what revenge is about. Revenge isn't just, I'm a good person, my father is murdered, so I have to take revenge. It's full of doubts, full of investigation, and it requires you to think more deeply about what revenge means.